What is anxiety? So I see anxiety as really what we do in our heads. So if we are focusing on the past overly and really sort of munching on it, that's rumination. And we're ruminating and we are maintaining that sense of the stress response. We're maintaining that ourselves in our minds. Now, if we are focusing on the future in an anxious way, we're worrying about the future. So we can see these things as a timeline. So anxiety or anxious thinking can be about the past in terms of rumination. Anxious thinking can be about the future in terms of worry. The stress response is in the here and now.
Hi, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to the Self-Development Podcast. In this episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with the chartered psychologist, social scientist, author and broadcaster, Dr. Meg Arroll. Meg started her career in academia focusing on medically unexplained conditions that leave people feeling lost, neglected, and at sea in a world of symptoms, stigma, and pain. This passion for finding answers to questions that no doctors seem to be able to treat came from her own experience, which gave her a rare combination of subjective personal experience and objective professional skills. Dr. Arroll aims to guide people through their journey so that they have the confidence to move forward independently. Meg is also the author of the book, The Shinkology Solution. Wow, can't believe I just messed that up, but never mind. And her latest book, Tiny Traumas, which I hope to hear more about today. How are you today, Dr. Meg?
Oh, thank you so much for that amazing intro. I'm very, very well. Johnny, how are you?
I'm okay. I mean, it's only an amazing intro because you've done stuff. You've done stuff, and I just like to highlight that.
Yes, indeed. And I've actually written more books than that. So I think under my belt, well, sort of 6 professionally published books, but I actually wrote a very short book. I would probably say it's a long essay about the film Labyrinth. So 80s-tastic, David Bowie and lots of sort of Jim Henson creatures. I wrote 10,000 words about that film, which is available still, and I'm actually quite proud of it. But so all in all, if you don't include that one, it's 6. And the early books very much relate to my early sort of career in academia. So I did study these conditions that are termed medically unexplained. Actually, now we do know a little bit more about them, but they're sort of conditions that have unknown etiology. So things like chronic fatigue syndrome, like irritable bowel syndrome, and fibromyalgia, things like that. There's quite a few of these conditions. And I taught when I was still lecturing. I was at University of East London and teaching with 2 amazing colleagues. And we ran a module called the Psychology of Physical Illness, which again, we can debate whether that's accurate or not, but it was a 3rd-year elective. And so many of the students who chose that module had conditions themselves. And they asked us, are there any books about these conditions? And so we did a bit of review, and what we found were there were very sort of hardcore medical textbooks and there were patient narratives, but there wasn't anything in the middle. There wasn't something taking the evidence base, but also people's lived experience and interweaving the two, and something that was quite accessible. So that's when I started writing books, basically, and on top then of sort of, the peer-reviewed scientific papers and things like that. And I really, really enjoyed it. So it's been quite a long evolution, but and Tiny Traumas is sort of where we've ended up right now.
It's incredible. I haven't made my way all the way through it yet. I'm just sort of picking it up and putting it down amongst busy life stuff, kids and all that sort of stuff. It's like as soon as I touch this book, one of the kids wants something. So I'm a bit sort of apprehensive even just to hold it now, just in case they come in. But yeah, it's amazing, and I love the concept of the importance of these tiny traumas that are so easy for people to just brush under the carpet and say, oh, well, I'll just crack on or whatever. But we're going to get into that. I mean, some stuff is, first of all, it's very clear to me that you're one of these people that is like, look, if you want something done, let's just do it ourselves. So well done
Yeah.
for that. You just thought there's no text out there, so I'll just create it. It's fine.
Just write it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be
In our
fine.
spare time.
But yeah, yeah, just do that on the side, you know. But there's also the you looking into the labyrinth. How interesting, because I've got some really like crazy theories about that film. Because if you watch it as an adult, the way you remember it as a kid, it's not the same. Like that bog of eternal stench is an analogy. I'm telling you.
Oh my God, it's this a meeting of minds because very few people, well, we know the film, but very few
Yeah.
people are probably have analyzed it as in depth as perhaps we have. But
Mm.
absolutely. So that sort of 10,000 word long essay stroke book, I pulled in lots of sort of different psychological theories, attachment theory with Sarah, and
Oh
obviously
wow,
losing her
goosebumps.
mum at a young age, things like that,
Yeah.
and what sort of the characters really mean. But it's also just fun. But
Yeah.
what I think is a really important thing is that using art forms like movies and like different sorts of things that we can sort of explore could be something really important to help explore our own sort of mental health and well-being. And I often use in terms of my clinic art and music and other ways to explore how we're feeling, because it can be really hard just to talk about feelings. We're kind of not taught how to talk about feelings, and then when we're grown-ups, we're a bit older, and we've done so well in terms of mental health to
Allegedly.
yeah, exactly. To have a discourse. But I feel at the moment, in terms of the message, just talk, it's like, but how do we just talk? Like, it can be really challenging for
Yeah.
a number of people, and even myself. It's like, well, where do we even start in
Yeah.
terms of talking? Can be something that is very
And who's
much
there to
very much
listen? Who can
yeah,
listen? That's the other
yeah.
question. Is
So what's your theory, though? Just let me interject. What is your theory about the bog of eternal stench?
I think it's something to be said from like it being like a stepping stone thing, like for worrying. Like I've got this idea
Mm,
about worry walls and how like we just got to take one step at a time and all them sort of things.
mm,
But I don't really have a theory about it as such. I just can feel that there's a lot of analogies in there. There's a lot of association. There's a lot of lessons. But I think you're right in what you say about analogies and using storytelling. I think there's definitely something to be said from ancient wisdom being shared around around a
mm.
campfire or whatever. But a really great analogy that I learned from someone once was a good way to explain how you can have conflict in emotions. Have you ever heard of the three bowls?
I'm not
No.
sure.
So
Explain.
you have one bowl in the middle that's lukewarm water or room temperature, and you
Mm,
have one to one side that's like near boiling hot, the other one that's freezing cold with ice cubes in it, let's say. And you put your hands in the middle bowl and you can feel its room temperature and you understand its room temperature and it's comfortable and it's fine. And then you put one hand in the really hot water and the one hand in the cold water and you leave it in there for as long as you can bear. And the cold water makes your bones feel like they're about to snap, that cold type of feeling. And then
mm,
the hot water becomes near scolding, and it's time to take your hands out of both. You take your hands
mm,
out of both the water, you put them in the middle. One hand will tell you that lukewarm water is boiling hot. The other one will tell you it's freezing cold. And the only thing that contributed to that was the environments they were in previously. And it's an interesting way to help people understand how you can have those conflicting emotions. You can love someone with all your heart, but a little bit hate them too.
mm,
Or
mm,
you can feel strongly about something in both ways, and it comes from the environments that you're in, how they impact, and it then brings you onto that whole nature nurture discussion and all that sort of thing. But I just think, like you say, the analogies are really powerful for like helping people get their head around stuff sometimes,
mm.
because I think what you do so beautifully, which is so clear, is that you have this incredible way of explaining stuff. Like I've been in lectures before with teachers at uni and stuff, and I'm not being unkind, but it seems to me their main objective is to show me how smart they are, not teach me anything. So I'm sort of sat there like, wow, you're really clever, clap. I've learned nothing, but I'll go and teach it myself. There's no worry. And I think like you're one of those people that understands the concept. You've done all the hard work. Clearly, you've more than done that, and now you get to explain it in a really beautiful way. It's not about saying, look how smart I am. It's about saying, I hope you understand this. I hope this helps. And I like that about you. I think that's really great attribute.
That's just such an amazing compliment and feedback. But there is a reason, Jolly, that I left academia. So
Oh,
But
I would
yes.
like to know this.
Yes, indeed. But the one thing that I've always missed really was the teaching, but mainly like the seminar teaching, not just the big lecture theatre with 300 students and talking at them, talking with them,
Yeah.
really talking with them, and being able to use those analogies and those metaphors are so important, because I just love that. And I'm going to steal that, your three balls,
It's
because
not mine. I stole it from somewhere too.
well, no, well, absolutely, it's an evolution, isn't it? And
Is.
you know, really bringing that knowledge to the fore, and that is a perfect analogy to use for tiny traumas as well, because the difficulty, and to be honest with you, Johnny, some of the kickback I've had a little bit with the book is
Really?
that, well, do you know what, these things, they really aren't important, and you know, if we mull over these things, then surely that's just gonna, you know, make us moany, you know, rather sort of
That sounds like a
unhappy.
scared person.
Yeah. And so, but one of the points that I feel very strongly about sort of making is that just because you may have had a similar experience and it actually hasn't impacted you, that experience can impact someone else in a completely different way. And in fact, it's more likely to impact someone in a completely different way because they have a different life course than you. They've come from a different environment. They have, you know, even simple things like whether, you know, physiological things, whether you've had a good night's sleep, whether you're hungry, all these things.
Yep.
So it is not about the event per se. It's useful to explore events in an individual sense, but in terms of comparing them, let's just get over this constant comparison, please. And let's definitely not trauma shame people around it, because I think you would be surprised that in terms of quite a lot of the interviews I've done, there has been that kind of sense, well, let's just keep calm and carry on. And, you know, it's not big enough to worry about. And it's like, no, these things accumulate over time and they cause people real difficulties in their life. And yeah, people might be able to still go to work and to sort of take care of their sort of family responsibilities, but their quality of life is rubbish. And we don't need to live that way.
Yeah, they don't. This is it. This is that people don't focus on those things because they don't think they're significant, but then they don't realize that what they're doing is they're developing those future reactions. You know, that's how that works. It's like you have a situation that happens to you, you react in a certain way, and it sort of gets locked in almost.
Yeah.
If you don't pay attention to it, it
Yeah.
becomes your auto reaction to stuff instead of your response. You know, and I think people often get confused around that reaction response. Response is what you sit there wishing you had done. That's the response. That's generally the response. And when no one's saying it's easy to do, it's not a case of like, oh no, I know you're experiencing significant anger right now, but just calm down and think rationally. That's annoying. I get that. But it's possible with practice to do exactly what you say in the book. With practice.
And the thing is when we dismiss some of these smaller traumas, what happens is we do not take the opportunity to develop those adaptive and helpful coping strategies.
Absolutely.
So the more we're just like, oh no, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal, but there's a part of us like, yeah, that really did affect me, then we let that experience go, we let that opportunity go. And why, you know, we can make use of even difficult experiences in that way. But it doesn't mean, as you say, it doesn't mean it's not hard. And again, this is the difficulty, because what I say in clinic, I say it's, you know, I'm never going to tell you it's easy. It is hard. It's effortful, but it is absolutely worth the effort. And that is the difference.
Yeah, that freedom, you know, like I'm sober, and that I can honestly say truthfully, the hardest part about my sobriety journey was making the decision to go sober. That was horrible. The emotions I had around that, because what I never expected, what I never foresaw, was the grieving process that comes along with the companionship that alcohol offers you, you know, and that was difficult. It was very difficult, that grieving process, that loss. But you know, as we go back to what you were saying about comparison, that's a real trap, isn't it? Comparison. I know this is not something I told you we'd go completely off the questions. But like that, I've got this idea that like comparison is the emotional debt from investing in other people's dreams. That's the way I look at like comparison. It
Mhm.
is a choice. It's like, why do we have a terrible day where you've woke up, you didn't sleep very well, you didn't get a chance to have breakfast, you've had 3 or 4 coffees, so you've got no food in your stomach, you're all gassed up on coffee, and the kids are driving you crazy during the holidays. And then your solution to that, instead of like giving yourself what you need, is to go on Instagram and watch your mate who always puts pictures up of them baking and playing with the children. Why do we do that?
Mhm.
What's that about?
Mhm.
Why do we actively almost look for that misery, that confirmation bias that we are terrible at parenting or whatever it is we're feeling at the time?
So definitely need a big dose of compassion here, because
Mm.
actually, in terms of our evolutionary sort of progress, we are driven to seek out up comparisons. So we always see, okay, who has, the better life, perceived better life, who is making more money, who is happier, who, all these things, and we compare up. And in terms of our evolution, that was adaptive because it allowed us to be able to develop new skills. It also allowed us to be safe in environments. But the thing is, now our physiological sort of responses to the environment hasn't changed very much, but our environment has changed hugely. So whereas we would have lived in very small groups of people, so you might have compared yourself with, a handful of people then, now we are comparing ourselves with the whole entire world, with billions of people. So you will always find up comparisons. What we tend not to do is do down comparisons as much. But also, Johnny, there's some really fascinating research that showed, even when we're looking at socials online, even if we know that they have been curated or tweaked or filtered, it still triggers the same emotional response in us, even if we know that. So a lot of the times the answer isn't just to sort of be like, well, yeah, I do know that actually they only really sort of post things that seem perfect, because it still triggers that response. The answer is to manage our consumption, because information consumption is the same as fast food consumption. So yeah, have a little bit of it, have a treat, whatever you want. But if you consume it all the time, it's going to start to cause some problems.
Yeah.
So yes, but we do tend to compare up. But I think another thing that perhaps we don't talk about as much, that we compare our lives with all of the other lives that we might have had, and that can be harder too. So we,
Is
as
that
human
regret?
beings,
Would you say that's regret, tying into regret, or not really?
I would say it can be. I think
Yeah,
it can be. But again, what we tend to do is we imagine our alternative lives to have been so much better.
of course.
And we don't be like, okay, well, if there was that sliding doors moment and I made that decision, well, actually, I would be in this really horrible position. And because we will imagine the best. And again, that's
Somewhere there's a
great.
6'5" version of me somewhere. Somewhere.
But just having that awareness that that's what we're doing can be a really huge step forward, because I think those other self comparisons can be even harder. So that decision to be sober, again, I mean, absolutely huge and amazing and powerful, but again, really hard,
Mm.
really hard, because in terms of making those decisions, we can kind of feel like, yeah, but maybe I've wasted a lot of this time. So there would maybe some regret there.
Mm.
And perhaps if I hadn't done things in the past, but actually we could think we're in the middle somewhere, and really focus on what we have now too, and the resources we have now too, to create the life that, we want, and that will suit us as well.
Yeah, there's also like when you say that life that we want, there are some of us that use them little vessels of guilt and shame to make ourselves feel like we don't deserve that. Or, I'm working with someone at the moment who is just a remarkable person. It really is, and is so capable of helping so many people in a really powerful way. And the only person standing in their way is themselves.
Yeah.
And it's like I mean, I can't even imagine how many times you've experienced it with clients, and you're sat there and you just want to say, just do this, but you can't, because they have to come
No.
to that themselves.
Yeah.
And it might not be right for them, and there's all sorts of decisions that only they can make. And it's just watching somebody grow is one of the most beautiful stroke frustrating things that you can have the pleasure of witnessing. It's very, very difficult, but I feel like we've got totally ahead of ourselves. For those people, as I knew we would, because you and I met on a radio show, and I felt we had more to say to each other then too. but we weren't able to. But for those that haven't come across you yet, could you tell people a bit about yourself and your journey so far?
Johnny, that's always so hard for psychologists. It's like we're sort of trained not to talk about ourselves, so it feels very uncomfortable and it feels very awkward. But I'm going to dive into
this. Feels like a Jedi battle.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I talked a bit about sort of my career, but okay, about me. So,
if you don't mind,
no. So I have been interested in mental health for a very long time. Because my dad, he passed away during COVID, very sadly, but he had bipolar disorder, and he was undiagnosed and misdiagnosed for a very, very long time, and it was incredibly challenging, as you can imagine. But one of the things that I always found hardest was actually some of the sort of stuff that surrounded that. So the stigma to do, and that was 30 years ago. And so we have come quite a long way, but the stigma around mental illness, and my mom always said like that was the worst thing that could have ever happened to us. And it's like, okay, let's review that. But definitely stigma from kids at school. I remember one day a kid came up to me and he was like, yeah, I heard your dad was in this place, which was a mental health hospital, as an accusation to me. And it was incredibly upsetting. And again, that wouldn't be seen as a big trauma, but it really affected me. It really, really affected me. I thought these things are really important. So yeah, I decided to study psychology, and then went the sort of whole course with that. But yes, was very much a researcher, but then went back to private practice where I am now. And I have a very sort of solution focused approach, but that doesn't mean ignoring the past. It really means understanding what we've been through, having a sense of acceptance around it, which you and I both really work with, that acceptance piece, which I believe is actually the hardest piece. But then taking
there are days of unacceptance too.
And that's okay. And that's really okay.
It is.
But then taking action forward to be able to make changes. And so I think some of those criticism is about, just looking at, focusing on trauma, are you going to get stuck? No, it's not about being stuck. It's about having that knowledge to be able to move on. So yeah, so always had a real interest, and obviously my whole career is in psychology, but also I was born in the States, grew up in America until I was about 11, but have been in the UK for most of my life, and feel very much sort of both, dual citizen and part of both countries, but really have appreciated all the experiences I've had here. But yeah, I think in terms of psychology is in everything we do. We are human beings. Psychology is the study of human behavior and thought. So it is endlessly fascinating. And I would say I learn more from my clients on a daily basis than maybe they learn from me. It's just the most fulfilling career that I could ever imagine for myself.
Oh, that's wonderful. That it's like psychologists, therapists, coaches. I always ask them about themselves. It's because it proves to be much like an origin story of a superhero, if you will, somebody that actively goes out and helps others. And yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, that remark that was said to you, and you talk about that, and you sort of skated over that, and if that was for a reason, then we don't have to continue talking about it. But that it's remarks like that bring you towards the book. Yeah. Because it is. I've had a client before whom grew up with very low self-esteem, very low self-confidence, and she was dating somebody whom many consider to be a handsome fella. And one day, some girl said to him, "Why are you dating that girl? Because she's fat." And
Mm-hmm.
that remark
Mm-hmm.
just devastated all aspects of her life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Mm-hmm.
such a drunken throwaway comment that
Mm-hmm.
her partner was very cross about, and obviously didn't validate whatsoever. And frankly, whether it matters or not, it doesn't. But she wasn't. It was just
Mm.
clearly some jealous girl having her opinion. And
Mm.
it's, someone might say, "Oh, just get over that." But I
Mm.
cannot tell you, sort of trying to keep quite confidentiality here, but I cannot
Mm.
tell you the impact
Mm-hmm.
that had on that girl, on the rest
Yep.
of her life, the way she saw herself, the way she saw herself amongst certain people. So for you to have that comment said to you, I
Mm-hmm.
can imagine there are probably people that says, "Oh, don't listen to them," or whatever. But what do you think? What impact do you think that had on you? How do you think that sort of changed things for you?
So a lot of tiny T's and a lot of those types of experiences, they really trigger some very difficult experiences and
Mm.
feelings like shame. Guilt and shame are some of the most difficult emotional experiences to work through. And so then I was, oh God, like 13, 14, very, very young.
Yeah.
And also there was still more stigma surrounding mental health. So what that does is it tends to shut people down. And then there is involved with that quite a lot of self-blame, self-stigma around that, and questions around, well, is it something about me? What's wrong with me? Why is this happening to me? But not being able to talk about it because it's not that big. It's not
Mm.
that big. It doesn't seem that big.
Yeah.
So even if you do go and say, this happened to me and I feel very confused, I actually don't really know what I feel, but it doesn't feel nice, then the kind of comments for a very long time that perhaps even very well-meaning, and it's often, if not always well-meaning, people will say is, oh, don't worry about that. Or like with your friend, like, well, actually, you're not overweight. That's not the point. That's not the
No,
point. It's how it's made you feel.
that's
So
exactly right.
you may take those steps to try and discuss it, and other people don't actually know how to discuss tiny T's and tiny T trauma, and so it just pushes you back in yourself, and then you close up, and then over a life course you will probably collect quite a few of these, and intermingled will be the bigger T's. And just for a moment, just to kind of explain really what we mean, and those are great examples, but to explain what we mean by tiny trauma or tiny T trauma, is that we really understand a lot more about big T trauma. So this is the capital T on trauma. So those really significant events that we know affect people's psychological and physical health. So say, some of those things like losing a caregiver very early life, living through a war zone, abuse, all different forms of abuse. And we know that, but it's so accepted now that there isn't that stigma attached to it. But also, we haven't studied nearly as much of these sort of events that really do affect people, perhaps don't seem as big. And that's natural. So psychology is a really new discipline if we think about it. It's not been around for that long. And so we tend to focus on the most obvious issues first. And then over time, there's an evolution and we look at the more nuanced discussion. And so we can see these big T traumas at one end, and then there are life events that most of us will experience, or all of us will experience at some point. But things like, getting a divorce, even getting married, it seemed to be a very stressful life event. But
Sorry, I love the idea of describing marriage as a trauma. It's quite good.
in terms of stressful life events, absolutely,
You
absolutely,
are
and because
right.
it's
Like,
a big change, it's a
it
big
is.
change. So
Yeah.
we have in psychology this scale, and it was developed by these two researchers, Holmes and Rahe, and it's like 100 different life events, and at the top, and they're ranked in order of how sort of stressful they are. I use stressful like that because I have a sort of different view on what stress is and what anxiety is, but
Another
the
question.
impacts, the impact. And so at the top, unsurprisingly, is the death of a loved one. So that's sort of scored 100 out of 100. But this list is very, very long. And you sort of go down the list and there's things like, being in a minor car accident, and it's still stressful. And the point is here, what their research, and they reviewed thousands and thousands of medical case notes of people who were seeking psychological services. And what they found was that if you had many of these events in a short period of time, there was a correlation with having some diagnosable psychological conditions like anxiety and depression. So I thought it was really interesting. So we do know about life events, we know about big T trauma, we know about life events, but actually intermingled even with this are these smaller things. And in my practice, what I found was that when I was exploring things with clients, it really was these smaller things, and they were embarrassed about verbalizing them, about talking about them, about expressing them.
How interesting.
And it was just so important. And I remembered when I was still teaching that module that I mentioned, the psychology of physical illness, and getting together lecture notes and reviewing research papers around it. And there was a paper about, it wasn't exactly IBS, but it was gastrointestinal disorders. And they basically looked at and compared people that had experienced the big T, capital T trauma, to people that had actually experienced more minor but cumulative trauma, what I call tiny T trauma, lower case T trauma. And it was found that actually it wasn't that they even had a similar outcome. The people with the sort of constant, little T, tiny T trauma had worse health outcomes than those that had significant major traumas that we would recognize very clearly as trauma. And that just blew my mind, Johnny. It was like, whoa, like huge moment.
Yeah.
I remember that paper for years and years and years. I'm like, that is so important.
Yeah.
So important. And there is something about these smaller, this like what I call the psychological and emotional buildup of like silt. It's like silts in our minds.
Yeah, great analogy. Yeah.
In terms of how that impacts our daily life. So I've just really gone off on that.
No, I loved that. I loved that. That was all it does is just take us further and further away from what it's fine though. That's exactly what it's about. But I mean, I wonder there, what you got me thinking about there is that like that person that you are right now and that person that you want to move towards, that person you want to be, the one that you maybe making assumptions feel has got, life figured out, fulfillment, whatever. And in between that is this gray area. And in that gray area is lots of things, your limiting beliefs, your core values, your belief systems, all those different things. And what's interesting there is it's also going to be a collection of experiences, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a collection of tiny T's, it's not the tiny T, it's the narrative and the explanation you take from that tiny T. So what it means. What does it mean? What does it mean? So somebody tells me I'm fat, it must mean I'm fat and I'm undeserving of this person. Somebody gets told that they're not a great, I've had another client who got told, and again, this sits right in that tiny T's, they're a terrible singer, stop singing. Never sung again, never did karaoke, never did singing in the shower, loved singing though. So now we've got a couple of things.
Johnny, I think that was me. Oh my god! No, absolutely. And this is what we talk about, the impact. I had a client who, as a teenager, had really bad acne, and someone said to them, "You're ugly," and they
can't handle that.
Really,
it's horrible.
And this client didn't date for years and years and years because that had been internalized. So absolutely, these are very, very sort of significant experiences, but they are things that we can absolutely overcome. But the only way to do that is to explore them first and to unpick them, and to not just always think, oh, well, there are worse people out there. And that's what I call reverse misery trumps. So what I see so often.
Say that again,
reverse misery trumps, which is when we undermine our own experience by saying, well, someone else has it worse off. And that may be true. But actually both can be true. You could be having a hard time and someone else can be having a really difficult time too. Those things can exist together. And what that does when we do that to ourselves is, again, we just say that we're not worthy of exploring this. We're not important enough. We're not valuable enough to explore this and to be heard, even to ourselves. So yes, reverse misery trumps, and it does show something really positive, that we are compassionate, and I love that about
Yeah.
people. But we're
Well,
not compassionate to ourselves. Like, one of the biggest things I work with, and I'm sure you work with, is the lack of self-compassion that we have.
you've hit upon. I honestly believe that if you really want to get over any situation at all, no matter what it is, compassion has to be the place you start.
Yeah, compassion
Because
is key.
what if something, if someone does something to you or something happens to you, having an understanding of that other person, what they may have been going through, what they may have been experiencing, the misunderstanding or the misjudgment they may have made, and why they did that. You know, you can go on and on. If you can get in that headspace, then you can move past things. Otherwise, you stay in that rumination, you stay in that victimhood, which, and I get it. I'm not, saying that someone shouldn't play the victim or anything like that. I'm just saying, how helpful is it? And I think that's what it comes down to, is that but people have to want to change. They have to want to change, which is difficult, because to want to change means also you have to do exactly what you just said, which is go into that deep, dark forest that you've been avoiding for a really long time because you're scared of what's in there, and that makes sense. It makes sense to feel that fear. Of course it does. It's scary. It's not unreasonable to be scared of something that's scary, but we sit in that gray area telling ourselves that, oh, we shouldn't feel scared. This isn't that significant. Other people have got it worse. Rare. All of this stuff just carries on, piling on all of the problem. You're just making more silt, as you say,
Yeah,
which I love that
definitely.
analogy. Silt. Perfect.
And what happens then, and what I'm sure we both see in our practices, what happens then is it develops into some what we call very maladaptive thought and behavioral patterns. So what I see is high function anxiety. So often the curse of busyitis, because we don't want to feel what we're feeling. So we're going to keep really, really busy. We're going to always be busy, because then there's no time and space to do that. Sort of low grade depression, but really it's about just feeling numb to the world. So you're not feeling, I have so many clients that come and say, well, look, Dr. Meg, I know I'm not depressed. I'm not depressed. But if we explore feelings, there's just no feelings there, just numb, comfortably numb to the world.
Yeah.
Also patterns like emotional eating, sleep difficulties, things like that, having that real sense of imposter syndrome, that you're not good enough and somebody's going to find out one day. All of those sorts of things. So they do build up, and once you sort of get to that point, it's having an impact on your life. It really is having an impact on your life. The difficulty there is with our healthcare system as it is at the moment, and of course it changes and evolves, and I've seen that myself, and we really are never static in that way. But the difficulty we have right now is that if you were to go to your GP in terms of exploring some of these sort of patterns, the help would be limited, because most people in that space wouldn't meet the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. So the help that is offered is limited. And again, imagine a client who has really built themselves up to go and seek support, and then told, you know what, you're not bad enough. You don't meet the criteria. And that again just pushes people back. And we don't have that more nuanced service towards mental health to be able to say, okay, may not meet this diagnostic criteria, but these are things that are still going on, and we can make sense of them. And that's really important, because people are meaning making machines. We will always make meaning out of something. If we cannot find a meaning, generally the default is self-blame. So
Absolutely. No, totally. You're absolutely right. That blame thing, that is just, I often say to people, like, I get it. You want to blame people. You want to blame people. You want someone to have some responsibility for it. And if you can't find anybody, you blame yourself. But how helpful is that? Because blame just keeps you in those angry feelings, those secondary emotions, because you're unable to have those primary emotions because they're too sensitive, and it's just, to me, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I you can see how that's just like this perfect recipe for what we're experiencing in the world right now, which coincidentally brings me on to the next question, which was, well done. You've done this before. For some, it can feel as if everything is designed in the world around us to induce anxiety, inadequacy, and fear. So, you know, you go to the doctor or something like that, and you're told that you're not bad enough or whatever. But this is where, and I think we both agree on this one, is this where that accountability can come in. So what can you do for yourself? How can you help yourself? You know, and people follow mental health accounts. They I don't know, read books about it. They might watch documentaries on Netflix and stuff like that to become informed, but they stop short of taking those actions. So what are the things that someone can do for themselves to help them be able to cope in a world that is filled with a lot of anxiety and, you know, people, you know, fitness industry trying to tell us that we need to look a certain way. You've got people scaring you that you're making mistakes here, there, and everywhere, but here's the solution that costs you $4.99 a month. You know, all that sort of stuff going on. And then that anxiety of, you know, one of the things that I found really difficult during the pandemic was the necessity for every news channel to have the death toll in the corner of I wonder whether there would have been another way to do that. You know, maybe a specific site or time that you can log into if you want to know the death toll. But otherwise, it just felt like a mechanism for drip feeding fear to people all day long and anxiety. So anyway, I'll shut up and let you answer the question. No. So what can people do for themselves around all this thing, the environment and that they're living in at the moment?
So I think a really good place to start with this is in terms of that fear response, in terms of the innate stress response, it is actually adaptive. It is actually helpful. So we do still have this very old, ancient stress response that triggers a range of physiological let me say it again, a range of physiological changes. And these helped us survive. So if we think about, and we've talked about this a lot within, you know, psychology, a lot on social media. So it's helped us survive. So you can fight, flight or freeze, and freeze is a really important one as well. And we need that to survive. We absolutely need it. So I don't want to demonize the stress response. We need stress. We need stress, but we also, it's helpful to be able to manage it. Now so the stress response is for that in the moment, something, you know, dangerous is happening. So say you're driving and a car, you know, cuts you up. You need that stress response. You need all those physiological changes. You need that boost of energy. You need to be razor sharp in terms of your vision and reactions to be able to swerve out of the way. Adaptive, useful, beneficial. The difficulty with our environment is that that stress response is triggered all the time. So like you're saying with the rolling death toll, that's triggering the stress response all the time. Say we have, you know, really demanding jobs and, you know, I've got to give these really difficult presentations all the time, triggering. But to be able to manage that where we can. So in terms of focusing on the things that we can control. So during the pandemic, we couldn't control how many people were passing away. But we could control how much we consumed that news feed. We could control how much we watched the news. So during that time, my work with clients was very much to control that consumption around that. Now, of course, we were in such a chronic state of stress because this was happening, you know, in our lives, that the difficulty there is that we want to look at the numbers because it feels like it's going to be reassuring, but that's an addiction, that addictive like. Yeah. That's an addictive like pattern.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, actually. I really am. Sorry.
And it just maintains that stress response, which does over time have a really profound physical effect in terms of if you've got these high levels of cortisol just zooming around your body all the time, it can start to have, it can lead to physical problems, but also it doesn't feel very nice too. It feels very unpleasant because the stress response is an acute response. It's inbuilt so that we can survive an acute event. It's not for these chronic events. And so that's the difficulty we have. Our physiology hasn't really caught up with our environment that has changed so much. But what can we change here? What can we action here? We can action some things, and not always everything, but some things in our environment to be able to control that. But also to disentangle what is anxiety. So I see anxiety as really what we do in our heads. So if we are focusing on the past overly and really sort of munching on it, that's rumination. And we're ruminating, and we are maintaining that sense of the stress response. We are maintaining that ourselves in our minds. Now, if we are focusing on the future in an anxious way, we're worrying about the future. So we can see these things as a timeline. So anxiety or anxious thinking can be about the past in terms of rumination. Anxious thinking can be about the future in terms of worry. The stress response is in the here and now. So you can pick out which bits of these things can I control, because you can't always control the stress response, but you don't want to because you need it to survive. So having, again, just a more nuanced conversation about this, it's not all good, it's not all bad, but what can we do to manage it?
Yeah, man, I could talk to you for hours. I'm pretty confident we were separated at birth at this point. Like, honestly, I totally agree with you on everything you're saying. And there's something that keeps resonating with me as you speak, and you come back to the same things. I mean, my whole philosophy around helping others is, if there is no real action, then it is acceptance. Is accepting it. There's nothing more you can do. And that's horrible and frustrating, and it's unfair, and it brings up all these emotions of just real, like, oh, I just wish it wasn't true. Yeah, I know. And that is the thing here. And it's that meaning that we apply. And in that gray area I spoke about earlier, it's all those things that we tell ourselves shouldn't be true. I wish they wasn't true. We keep reimagining the past in our head, ruminating, as you said, trying to change it, trying to find where you was accountable and what you could have done differently and all these different things. And all it does is the analogy I often use for that is that picking the scab. It's that picking the scab. You've got that wound. If you leave it alone, the body knows what to do. It will heal, but we keep picking it, re-injuring it, re-injuring it, re-injuring it. And every time we do it, we refill the emotions, we refill the pain. And sometimes we even change that narrative a bit. We build on it. We build in it. We start to stick a bit of blame in there for this person, a bit of blame for ourselves, and how I'm stupid because I didn't do this. And I didn't
feed it.
We
really actively feed it.
That maintenance cycle you were talking about is so important. I was going to bring that up a bit later. That maintenance cycle, and it's like one of the hardest things that you can get someone to realize, but most beneficial, is where their accountability is within their own mindset. So what are you actively maintaining here? Why, isn't it interesting how sometimes when we go to work with people and they tell us the thing they don't want, but yet when you start to challenge it, they actively defend it. And it's just like, I understand why they're doing it, because the idea of it not being there anymore creates an anxiety, because it's that familiarity offers us comfort, and that makes sense. But we have to remember that we don't want this behavior anymore, or we want to change our relationship with it. And everything that you talk about, it sounds to me like it comes down to the meaning that you apply to these feelings, these thoughts, because thoughts are not facts. We create the meaning ourselves. And then asking ourselves not what we should have done, what we shouldn't do, is what can we do? How can we move forward? Because that creates that accountability. Accountability is not about blaming yourself. It's the wrong way of looking at it. It's about, where can I reclaim my power again? That's what it is for me anyway.
And that's such an important distinction. And I think, again, around the concept or even the word acceptance, because oftentimes we mistake acceptance with resignation. So when I talk about acceptance, I'm sure you've had this experience before. When you talk about acceptance, people say, well, that's just giving up. Well, I don't want to give up. That's just giving in. No, it's moving on. So
letting go.
Not being stuck. It really is about being empowered. It absolutely is. And so even exploring, what is the difference between acceptance and resignation? How does that feel? Let's do a bit of mind mapping around that and seeing the difference, because when people are resistant to acceptance, generally it's because they think it's resignation, and there are different things. But in terms of the accountability, so I know we both have we use A's in some of our ways to explain the process.
More evidence we were separated at birth, just saying.
That was really, really quite like a wow moment. So I have like a AAA process, and Johnny, you have like the 4A's.
Yeah.
And so, but it's really interesting. We both start with awareness, and I think we both end on action. And in the middle is acceptance. But Johnny, you have accountability, and I have, in my acceptance piece, it really is around that accountability. Or the way to move from acceptance to action is through accountability in that sense. And certainly it is about what can we do? What can we do? So having the awareness that these things have happened and we can't change the past. We're not aiming to change the past, to accept it as a way to move on to this actual, definite action. And again, I think sometimes with social media, we can feel that action is this massive thing. Like we're going to have to now, go and climb Everest, it like literally gonna have to do this big thing. And no, generally it's the small things, because
Make a phone call.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But just as the tiny T traumas are what I see that create that emotional silt, the way to work through it is often these small things. They're not these massive changes, the small changes in life that then build up to allow us to have a strong psychological immune system. And that,
Lovely.
yes. So
Yeah.
I'm all about using analogies around physical health for mental health, because I think it just clarifies things. So
It's helpful.
yeah. But also we really, and this wasn't always the case. I think we can kind of feel that we know about physical health, but we didn't always. It has really changed. But nowadays, we do kind of understand that in terms of maintaining physical health, we need to do a little bit every day, or most days. Can have a day off, of course, but doing a bit. Joining the gym and going once is not going to make us physically fit for that one day. It is consistency. But it's the same with psychological and emotional health. It is the consistency. And so when those tiny T's do come up, instead of pushing them under the carpet, instead of dismissing them, can use them to build that psychological immune system. Because the aim isn't to avoid all difficulties, all tiny T's, all bigger T's in life, because we can never do that. That's impossible. No. Yeah. And having that as a goal or expectation is always going to lead you to not be as tooled as you can be to deal with these things. So instead, reflecting on ones in the past, in a sense, to understand where we are now, but also when these things do happen, to be able to think about it as a bit of an emotional antibody. So yeah, it's tough at the time. It can be really difficult at the time, but how can I use that as this antibody to be able to cope with the same type of, or similar type of, pathogen, psychological pathogen in the future?
Yeah, that's, I wonder as well, like, you were talking about going from acceptance to action through accountability. I wonder if part of that as well is accepting that acceptance comes with allowing yourself to experience that emotion that you've been avoiding, that's been attached to that trauma. And what that means is cry, get angry, whatever that feeling is that you need to have. And quite often as a coach, when I talk to people, what I look for mostly is that conflict. Is that conflict, potentially called cognitive dissonance, I think. And it's looking for that. It's that, what are they saying and what are they doing? Where's this conflict? Where's this not lie, because I don't like that word, but where's this like half truth? Where's this meaning that you've drawn from this situation that doesn't quite tally up? Like, I literally had a friend over the weekend, and we went on a little adventure together. We're climbing the Atlas Mountains in May, and part of the group there was a picture taken, and they were really unkind to themselves, and they looked at the picture and stuff. And I said all sorts of things to them, like, first and foremost, it's not true. And I was like, so it doesn't really matter what you say to me now. I'm with you all the time. So I could see that you don't look the way you describe in this picture. It's potentially that this one photograph that was taken was just a bad angle. It's just a bad angle, but yet the meaning that was attached to that in such a rapid amount of time, brought that person down. And I think we can how we feel and how we think can impact each other, and we can feel differently based off of how we first think in the morning. We can think differently based off how we feel in the morning. And I think understanding which one of those comes first is decides on which direction you're going to take with it all. But that idea of just looking at a photograph and then condemning your whole life by applying all this meaning that's just not true is such a shame. I think, it really is.
And again, it's something that we haven't really been upskilled in to be able to realize that. So what the term I would use in my practice would be incongruence. Is something incongruent? Does it just not sit right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, does it just not marry up? And absolutely, I completely agree with you. Often it is because there are these difficult emotions somewhere in between that, leading
Yeah.
to some of the meaning making around that. But I think that what I talk about in terms of emotional experience, and I know that you do so much amazing work in those difficult emotions, but there aren't bad emotions and good emotions.
No.
There are feelings that feel a bit poo. They really
Yeah.
do. They feel unpleasant. They really don't feel nice for a reason, but they're not bad. They're not evil. We shouldn't demonize them. And there are emotions that feel really, really lovely. And actually, that could be problematic too when we're always striving to feel like this all the time. We must be happy 100% of the time, or we have failed in life. No, we have what I call, and so I have quite a few little analogies in the book, but what we have a motobiome. So again, we're quite, we've talked quite a lot about the gut microbiome in terms of we need a variety of flora and fauna, different types of bacteria to really populate our guts, which are the seat of our physical immune system. And we know if you eat different types of foods, a variety of foods, that you can really sort of boost the diversity in the gut microbiome. But actually, we need that emotionally too. So when we're experiencing a tough emotion that feels unpleasant, like, it's okay that it feels unpleasant, but by experiencing that, you are feeding your emotobiome. And again, to give yourself this psychological immune system that is going to be not just more resilient, because I feel resilience has been overused so much, but
Bit
it's
of a buzzword
just,
now.
yeah, it is. But it's just gonna make life feel more in control. And it's all about perceived control in this way, in a healthy way. But also, you're just going to feel more like yourself, because you're not trying to avoid what is part of the human experience, which is a full range of emotions.
Honestly, you need to make a really long audio book. Actually, you have done, I believe.
Well, that's really interesting, because there is an audio book, and I wanted to so desperately. I wanted to do the recording myself, but it was just a case of time. But in the book, I think one of my own fears about the book is that there's so much in it. And I feel that each chapter could be a book in itself. They're
Agreed.
big
I got the
topics.
sense. Yeah.
And so it really is kind of more like a taster, and it is my work and life to date. It absolutely is. And it's what I see, it's what I know to be true in that sense, based on research as well, and evidence-based, but also based on my practice and my own personal experience in that sense.
Yeah.
But
it's a brilliant representation of you as well. It's a like I said off the conversation, it's got a great feel to it. It's a beautiful looking book. It's got some great information in it. And what I love is it's so applicable. Like, you can apply this to your life, this stuff. There are little things that you can do to help you within the moment of anxiety or stress, or whatever you want to call it. There are also long-term things you can do in there. It covers all the bases. You should be very, very, very proud. I'm sure you are. I'm just holding it up now for those that are watching on YouTube. I'm just going to keep it there. One of the things that you said there that really resonated with me is I think, as you know, from us being on the radio that time, I suffered a lot of childhood trauma, and part of the trauma was sometimes when the violence was happening and I would cry, it would carry on until I stopped crying. So I learned not to cry as a kid, and I took that with me through my life. And one of the last things to sort of change for me was my relationship with crying. And what I've ended up doing is doing exactly what I found, a resource to help me with that, because it's so entrenched in me to not cry, to not cry. The feeling of crying is actually quite scary for me. And there's a song I use. It's just one song that works every single time. If I know I need to cry, I need to experience emotion. It took me a while to get to that point where I could even say that. So for me to say it on the podcast, I'm just I'm reeling from that in my own mind at the moment. But there's a song, Johnny Cash, Hurt, and whenever I play that song, by the time I get around to the third one, I'm there, and I feel better. I feel better afterwards. I feel like I've had that outward expression of that emotion, and it's helpful. It's helpful. And I think if you take that tactic potentially and you use it for what is the emotion I need to have right now, what do I, because it's true, isn't it? Those friends that come to you and are able to cry, they do feel better. You might not have said a word, but just that allowance for themselves, that permission to themselves just to feel their emotions in whatever way they need to, which generally is crying if it's something sad. Like we don't have the same thing around laughing, do we? You know, like if you take the competing emotion of laughter, joy, whatever, you know, we don't go, oh, I shouldn't laugh, you know, because something's funny. It's just, unless it's controversial, of course. but
and that is, you know, and again, when we talk about tiny T's, that's societal, the socio-cultural impacts. And again, someone would say, well, it's not a big deal, you know, but no, it is for the individual. Exactly. And actually, when we look at cross-cultural research, that's not the same around the world, you know, that laughter is not or that crying is not on a par with laughter. There are other places where crying is very, very acceptable. And so again, it's the meaning that's been attached to it by our society. And of course that filters down to the individual, and then that is in terms of how your beliefs can become a bit entrenched about it. And to be able to unpick that can be incredibly freeing in that sense.
That's exactly the feeling that I get when I do that. I feel like it's like the tears are a literal liquid representation. They're just filling up, and it's like it's gonna turn into something else, silt, if I don't get rid of it. But there was a really interesting program some years back called Tribe, which had a guy named Bruce Parry, and what he did is he traveled the world and he visited indigenous tribes in remote areas, and he got to this one island, I think in the Polynesian islands, and he stayed with them for a week. And when he left, the entire island came to wish him goodbye, and they all cried, all of them, that the whole island, the entire island, they cried as he got on his boat. And he was just like, this is the most surreal experience, like really crying. Some of them are really crying. It's like it's just really interesting to me where that custom may have come from, and what impact it has.
Absolutely, outwardly wailing almost.
Yeah.
And it's be interesting to explore what was the meaning there for that group of people. Were they expressing how much they cared about this individual who was now leaving? Perhaps, you know, I'd be fascinated. And again, just to show that, you know, that is a human response. It's absolutely a human response to an emotional response that we have. And I think, you know, in Western cultures, we very, very much try to contain our emotional response unless it's these acceptable emotions. But even kind of positive emotions can be seen to be unacceptable. If, you know, if you're too excited, people can be a bit uncomfortable as well. It's like, you know, don't have, you know, big expressions of emotions, because what that does is it challenges other people's emotional regulation, and that is why it can be very uncomfortable.
That's something I try to help people with all the time. They'll tell me a situation, and I'll immediately think that sounds like a them problem, not a you problem. But I'm not gonna go there. I'm just gonna let the person talk. But I've got this very long question here, but that brings us on to maintenance cycles. But it's when people are struggling, it's often an indicator that they need to make a change or changes in their life. However, they often resist that change, and this can cause a feeling of conflict that people often misread as being the problem. So this feeling I'm having, this conflict towards resisting what I know needs to happen, that's the depression, that's the anxiety, that's the stress, that's whatever. When actually it's just a resistance. So how can people break free from this sort of unhelpful maintenance cycle? Because I know in psychology, people talk about people actively, and it's difficult to hear, you know, for somebody that's listening to this now that may be experiencing depression or going through some form of depression or unhappiness, to say to them, you know, that you're maintaining that unhappiness, that just feels like something else to put on top of a whole guilt and shame cycle, doesn't it? So, and you can see how someone can get trapped in that, even as I say it. So how can people break free of that unhelpful maintenance cycle, that compulsion to want to do all the things that aren't so good for us and ditch all the stuff that is?
And it can be really, really helpful to, again, disentangle what bits of that am I maintaining? Because I think there is a danger of that sense of self-blame, in terms of there may be things outside of our control that are leading to feelings of anxiety, feelings of low mood. But what are the bits that I can change? What are the bits? And some of those things, when we talk about change, some of those things can be simple. I say simple. It's not easy though.
No.
But changes in the way that we think. So in psychology, we use the terms cognitive distortions, which again, I think feels slightly too harsh, but unhelpful thinking patterns. So thinking in terms of all or nothing. Well, you know, if I can't do this, then the rest of the world everything's going to fall apart. You know, we often get to those spiraling, very catastrophic thought patterns, just to be able to tweak. And I would say, just tweak and see where it goes. Like, just do some thought experiments, some behavioral experiments around that, and
love
see
that
how
thought experiment.
See how it feels. See how a different thought feels. And when we're thinking about these challenging patterns that people have, one way to really support each other is that there is always a reason for even that unhelpful thought pattern of behavior. There is always a reason. So it might not be your fault, but you're the only one that can do anything about it.
Oh, I love that.
And I use that quite a lot. And
I love it.
A little bit harsh.
I can hear it, but I kind of, when you're in the right spot, that's helpful. That's very helpful, you know.
But first, it's pinpointing what purpose does that behavior serve. It may be that it's protecting us from really difficult emotional experiences. It may be that it's protecting us from lots of things in life, from difficult conversations and relationships, from difficult experiences within, you know, our workplace. All these things, it always has a purpose. And once we realize it has a purpose, then we can move, well, what can we replace that with? Because it's not about extinguishing that. I think early in psychology, we used to think about, let's knock these things out, let's extinguish it. No. It's there for a reason. What's the reason? And what could be a more helpful and healthful replacement for it? That is very much the key to long-term change, whether it's a health change, whether it is a change in our thought patterns, but realizing that even if something is negative and affecting us negatively, even if it's a behavior that is not good for us, it is there for a reason. What's the reason? And we can work from that.
Yeah, it's like starting with the goal in mind, isn't it? Like, how do you want to feel, you know? And that's what people don't do. I can tell you it matters how you want to feel. What you want matters, but so many people don't think it does. And it does. It really does matter what you want. It matters how you feel. It matters how you responded to that comment. All of it matters. And we're just not very well practiced at, like, putting ourselves, not even first, just putting ourselves in the mix.
No, totally,
you know, just
in the mix.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to share some feedback I got from a question I asked, and then I'm going to ask you about the book, because I know you haven't got all day to talk to me, as much as it would be lovely. And that is, I put a little post out on my stories the other day, just saying, what are the barriers that people would feel would stop them from considering therapy or talking therapy? And here are some of the responses. One of them was hurting somebody.
Interesting.
Which I felt was interesting. Yeah. Another one was building boundaries with people. Yeah. So two that circumnavigate fear a little bit. Bringing emotions to the surface and how it will affect me, and where to even begin with talking. So what to say, what to talk about, you know, that awkward moment when the therapist or professional says to you, so how can I help? Or what would you like to talk about today? Or what would you like to focus on? Or whatever, that bit there of like, oh, what do I do? What do I say? I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm done talking about it. How's talking going to help? And all that sort of stuff. All them fears. And then this one, which I'm going to try and read, but I wasn't quite sure I understood. Me enjoying wishing myself to get hurt, break my arm or leg or fall or get burned, etc. Not really sure what that one meant. But it's something around enjoying the pain, maybe. I'm not sure. But a lot of the responses there, there were just a few of them that they've generally repeated. But can you hear a theme in there? Is there anything in there that you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, two themes mainly. I think in terms of prioritizing ourselves, that's again, that self-compassion piece is really big. So the fear that we would upset someone, hurt someone by actually nurturing ourselves.
Yes,
very, very much, and other people's reactions at, but really that fear of hurting others. And again, it comes from a compassionate place, but not the compassion towards the self.
Is that like who do I think I am? That shame, maybe. Is that what you mean? Yeah, that who do I think I am? The people are going to think this and think that, you know.
Or I mean, what I definitely see in my practice is other people's reaction to someone being within psychological therapy. So and this is something that definitely comes up. So parents perhaps being like, well, you know, I did my best. I did my best to raise you. I don't know why you have to see a psychologist. I don't know why. What did I do wrong as a parent that's led you to see a psychologist? And that's some of the stigma around psychological intervention and therapy that does still exist out there. So having that fear that you love your parents or caregivers or partner, whoever that important person is in your life, because it would have to be an important person, the fear that they will feel that they did something wrong,
they're not enough, sort of thing.
And protecting them from that. But when we do that, it doesn't quite work, does it? Because we do need to nurture and sometimes heal ourselves, and then we can be there for other people. So in that sense, I that's what I took from that question. And it's really fascinating that we took different things from that question too. I think that says so much.
Yeah, and it's also that there's that thought where some people might look at it as a weakness. You know, some people might say, I think that happens a lot with men. It's like, no, I'm not going to be doing all that. I don't need all that. And it's also like, you know, why don't you know, people make your feelings about them. You know, like, am I not enough for you? Why are you not happy? Why can't you just be happy? You've got everything. But there's a need that might not be a big one, but it's important, and you're not giving it to yourself. You have a need that's not being met, and it potentially can't be met by anybody else but yourself, but you're not allowing yourself to do it because, I don't know, you're focusing on the kids, or you're focusing on your partner, or you're focusing on your work, or you're focusing on everybody else but yourself. I talk a lot about emotional baggage, and I again use an analogy, and I say, like, you know, there are people in life that walk up to you with their emotional bags, and they put them down next to you, and they just look at you awkwardly till you pick them up. And if you're a people pleaser, you'll pick them bad boys up and skip away, and then you'll wonder why you feel so crappy later. But
and so exhausted and burnt out.
We've all got that person at work, haven't we? You know, the one that, you know, if you ask them at the wrong time, oh, how are you? And you're there for 20 minutes. And I'm not, you know, I'm sort of making light of it because, you know, I've met some people and used to have a neighbor who used to do that. Your name was Gary. You'd say, morning, Gary, how are you? And that was you for 20 minutes. I don't know how he collected so much problems over one day. It's just like, wow, Gary, you're really good at this. You know, but yeah, that emotional baggage. And I think it's just learning that you don't have to pick it up, because it is awkward. People want, they look at you like you need to say something now, or you need to do something now, but you really don't.
But you know? and I would challenge that a little bit as well, because we're making an assumption when we're looking at that person about what we think they want, and actually that could very much not be true.
Yep, absolutely.
Terrible grammar there, you know. But we are making that assumption that they've put those bags down and that they want us to pick them up. Actually, maybe they just needed a bit of a rest, and we could just stand there statically and not pick them up, and then they would actually take them and deal with them, you know. Put them on the gurney somewhere. Do you know what I mean?
I love that you bring that up, because you're right. It's that mental battle between two people that's unspoken, that's about, I feel like you want me to pick your bags up. No, I'm just resting my bags here. But you sure they look heavy? maybe it's almost like you're forcing them to take a certain perspective in a way, as I'm saying it, because you can see how that's going on. And it's, I wonder what happens if you just don't do that.
Exactly.
If you just stay in that space, that feels a bit compelling and awkward, you know.
And that's the thing, it's that uncomfortable silence, as it were, as we talked about before. But that's where, you know, tools like behavioral experiments can be so useful, because we make so many assumptions. And so, okay, so next time that happens, so don't pick up the bags and see what happens then. Make a prediction, you know, make a prediction and think about it, and then test that scientifically, test that prediction and see if the outcome is what you predicted.
I absolutely love that.
99 times out of 100 it is not what we think is going to happen. And so collecting that data in our own lives is incredibly important to be able to make those changes, because now we've actually tested some stuff out, instead of just, you know, going in with all of our sort of beliefs and expectations to a situation. But
I'm really excited for the listeners, actually, because I think to myself, like, if you're listening to this, try that. With nothing big, don't blow up your life. But just see what happens if you don't do the normal reaction, or you try something different. I think that's quite, there's some excitement attached to that I quite like, and the idea of just thinking, I'm just going to observe this and see what happens.
So there's an exercise in the book around that, and be a detective, be a scientist or a detective, and test it out. But the important bit is to make your predictions, because memory in retrospect is really rubbish. So make your predictions, jot it down, start off with a safe context, though, as you say, don't go nuclear on it, like literally something smaller. Start it in a safe context, test it out and see what the outcome is, and record it in a behavioral experiment document. And over time you can keep doing these things, and you know what this does? This helps confidence to grow. It helps our sense of self-efficacy to grow. But again, give yourself a little bit of time and space to do that. Because, you know, if we think, we wouldn't try and run a marathon with a week's training. So this is like, you know, it's a big change. So start off with a little bit of a run, an emotional run. You know, start off and build that muscle, because the muscles won't build over just a short amount of time. It takes time to allow that to happen. And, you know, to that comment as well, and what we were saying there, you know, is, you know, am I betraying someone if I go to therapy? That's kind of what it's saying to me. Is there a betrayal there? If we think about psychological health in the same way as physical health, if we knew we were getting quite physically unfit, and that we could see on the horizon that it could lead to pre-diabetes, that it could lead to heart disease, would we feel we were betraying our friends and family if we started to make time for ourselves to be able to go and do some physical exercise? Would be my challenge.
I've seen that in a lot, mainly women. They feel guilty for giving themselves that time. And well, I used to be a PT a while ago, and I used to do a women's only lifting club, and it was just one of the most beautiful things to watch, because it was just a bunch of women just being themselves, lifting heavy stuff, having fun. I learned more than I needed to know about women, to be honest. But at times I'm very grateful. Other times I just wish I didn't know stuff. It's okay though, it's all right. But I love that, like you're alluding to the fact that, you know, that real confidence is found in the places where you feel you don't have any confidence, really. But you don't want to jump into anything too big, but just nudging out of your comfort zone each time in little areas where you're not sure what's going to happen. You can start collecting the evidence to support the opposite, you know, which is just a really lovely way to put it. And then there was a question there, that the answer even to building boundaries with other people. And I often find that, you know, those people that you're worried about that kick back, they're usually the ones that were benefiting from you not having the boundaries in the first place. And that's hard, because some of those people might be people that it doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means that they've got their own stuff going on. And
they've got their own stuff. But again, I would say, in my experience, that a lot of that again is our assumption that if we start to build this boundary, that it is going to have this effect on another person, that they're not going to like it, that they're going to feel upset, they're out of it. And again, if you just do a little bit of that and test the water out, generally people are respectful.
Love
If
that.
there is someone who is disrespectful to that and he tries to, break that boundary down all the time, that gives you some very important information that you probably can use.
And it justifies a few things. It's hard to, that sort of sits around that gaslighting thing where you challenge someone on something that's being done so subtly. And it's like when you put that boundary in, there's a very clear line now. So when they overstep, you can go, well, hang on a minute, here was my line and you overstepped. It's very obvious now. Whereas before, if you don't have that boundary, are they overstepping? Are they not? There's questions there. There's uncertainty, and I think that's where gaslighting fits in sometimes, yeah, or even reactive abuse in some ways, I've seen that a lot recently, unfortunately. But anyway, as I said, your time is precious. So I would just finish with talking about your book, really. So in your book, Tiny Traumas, you explore the impact of the accumulative effect. Oh, look at that. It's rising. The accumulative effect of these tiny traumas that we experience over our life. And I mean, is there anything from the book that you'd really like to put over so people can go and grab a copy after they've listened?
The biggest thing, and in danger of repeating myself though, it is that little things can have big impacts, and it's the impact to you. It's not about evaluating that event in terms of how it might be perceived by the people or how a similar event might have affected the people. It's the impact to you. And the other thing I would really like to get across, and Johnny, you've used the term gray area a lot, and I'm all about the gray area too. So we really think in a very, very sort of all or nothing way around mental health, but there is this massive gray area between what would be that diagnosable condition and what would be really flourishing in life. But you know what, we often are in this gray area, but we can nudge into the flourishing field. We really, really can. It doesn't mean that life's not going to come and kind of like try and whack us down again, but that's okay. That is totally okay, because having that trust and our ability to cope is absolutely the fundamental sort of task of psychological therapy, is allowing people to know that they can cope with life's difficulties. It's not about avoiding life's difficulties.
Absolutely. I love that. And you're right. That is what the book sits. It does deal with those things. There are a lot of people in life that thankfully don't have those massive traumas. Like they don't experience those really, really, really seriously difficult things, but everybody has those tiny ones, and they impact our life in such a significant way. And that's why I believe this book is so important, because I think that you are acknowledging something that most people actually don't want to or don't feel they need to acknowledge, but if they did, it would have such a massive impact on their life. And you're not making crazy bold promises saying, oh yeah, you'll fix your life and be living in Disneyland for the rest of your life. You're not saying that. You're saying, hey, this is the process. And the thing about processes, I find, is when you get to the end of the process, you usually have a whole bunch more questions for the next process, the next part of life. If you look at it like a stairway, I quite often talk about it like a stairway. It's like as you get up that step, you start to see things you couldn't see before, which creates questions.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, you do. And it's like sometimes people stay at that bottom step. And again, this step representation isn't a representation of you becoming better than anybody else. It's just you are going on a journey. And at the bottom of that step, you can see what everyone else can see. You can all agree on that. And it's all very understandable. And as you go to the next step, you can see a little bit more, but not so much that that person can't understand what you're saying. You can see the tops of the trees, perhaps, and oh, it must look like the rest of the tree, but just the top. But at some point, you'll get so high in that journey that doesn't matter what words you put together, you won't be able to get these other people who are on the bottom step to understand what you can see. And they might not want to, because it might create anxiety. And I think sometimes what we do is we focus on those people on the bottom step and we tell them, hey, it's wonderful up here, come up here, but they don't want to. And that's okay. That is okay. But we also ignore the people that are on the same step as us, the ones that have gone on this journey too, the ones that you may have more in common with. I found that with sobriety. is that as I realized that sobriety was going to become the way I live my life, there were friends that were in direct conflict with that, and sobriety is the most important thing to me because it allows me to be the person I want to be.
Yeah.
It allows me to show up as the right dad, the right husband, the right coach, the right friend, the right son, instead of prioritizing alcohol over stuff, because that was helpful in avoiding my uncomfortable emotions. So yeah, I really, really do believe this book is a really, really great place to start for anybody that's got interest in what we've been speaking about today. It's got loads of answers in there, and also you have more books which we'll put into the thing, and I'm definitely going to have a look at that Labyrinth book. I literally got proper geeked out when you were talking about that. I was like, I love this. I love this. But I always finish with the same question, and that is it. Just before we go, is there anything that you'd like to pass on to people that could help them with their self-development?
I think it's very similar to Johnny, to what you were saying, that you matter. It may not feel this way right now, but just believe me, you do, and one day in the future you will feel that way.
Yeah, I'm going to make a collection of all of these one day, because there's some absolute wisdom bombs right there. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a pleasure. This could have gone on for hours and hours. It really could have. I've got a feeling we got some really similar thoughts on things. But just so people can find you, what's next for you, and where can people find you on social? Where can they pick up the books, and where can they find you?
So my website is drmegarroll.com. Socials are all handled sort of at Dr. Meg Arroll. In fact, you can Google me, because I'm the only one with my name in the whole world. A family member actually did a little bit of
Aren't you lucky?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Johnny.
Sort of. There's some guy gallivanting around the world pretending to be Johnny Lawrence. Anyway, I'll shut up. You carry on, please.
But yeah, so what's next for me? I feel very, very, very fortunate with Tiny Traumas, because it is in the process of being translated to 31 different languages across the world. So the year ahead is very much based on sort of discussing tiny traumas and putting the word out there about this new nuanced sort of discussion of mental health. And that is keeping me very, very busy. But as I say, absolutely feel blessed for it.
Do you know what? Like, every now and again, in the space I work in, I meet lots of different people, and sometimes I wonder whether certain people are working in the right industry and are the right people to put over certain things. You have your people like Andrew Tate and people like that putting out a lot of information that could be very, very damaging to certain people. But when I meet people like you, it makes me feel really, really happy to see somebody doing the right thing, saying the right things, getting important messages out there, and are able to articulate, because this is a difficult one. Because, as you say, I was disappointed to hear that you'd had some pushback, but I feel like you're able to push back again. So I love that you're the right person doing the right work, so you should be really proud of yourself. Everybody that has been listening today, I'm sure there's no doubt you can go out and buy the book. I'm holding it up. You can hold it up too, why not? Let's just flood the screen with Tiny Traumas. Look at that. So there's the book for people watching on YouTube. It's a beautiful book. Visually, it looks lovely, feels lovely, and it's got some really great wisdom in there. So please go out and check it out. I think you said it's an audiobook, is that right, as well?
Hardback audiobook, yes, Kindle version, and you can buy it on the big sort of website, but actually it's available in local independent shops and in physical bookstores too in the UK and Waterstones. So there are many different options.
Yeah, I got mine from Amazon. So I got that from Amazon, which was really good, easy, quick, and all that sort of jazz. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys, and thank you very much, Dr. Meg. And I'm sure now we're going to spend the next 2 hours talking. I'm joking. But yeah, I hope to do this again. Maybe we can look at doing a live down the future if there's any more questions that anyone's got for you, because you're a wealth of knowledge, and if we can get her on a live, we can ask loads of questions. So anyway,
I would love to. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. And I mean, I have exactly the same feelings towards you. right person with the right messages out there to really help and support people.
Oh, thank you so much for that. It's kind. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to doing it again soon.